You know, I shouldn't be surprised that the start of one of my trips has already proven to be a grueling experience. Between steep hills, heavy rains, and more, my attempt to bike from New Jersey to Boston and perhaps points beyond is off to a rocky start. For those of you just joining us, welcome. I'm the Restless Yankee, and today we're going to see the ups and downs of biking through the Catskill Mountains, including heavy traffic, lots of rain, astounding views, and more. I've also been trying to figure out a lot of important life stuff, but we'll get to that later. My journey began on Labor Day, September 5th, 2022. Heading north, my plan was to reach the town of Nyack just over the New York-New Jersey state line. Initially, it started fairly well.
That's the city limit. I am officially out of Jersey City. The bike, as you can see here, is a bit heavier than I expected. I haven't been riding with the front saddlebags, but we're getting there.
Unfortunately, from that lofty start, I decided to get a bit more ambitious and detoured onto a more scenic route, which proved to be a bit more difficult than I expected.
So this is a bit of a broken road. This is the only way I can see to get down to Palisades Park. I don't think I can get through there. Shoot. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. The last few miles have just completely been kicking me in the rear. It's in the 80s, it's up and down. I probably should have stayed to the surface streets.
Still, I continued to soldier on, and eventually I was rewarded.
Oh, it's a road. It's actually New York State Bicycle Route 9, which is probably what I should have stayed on all day.
This was then followed up by the first major landmark of this trip.
You have no idea how happy I am to see this.
I had planned to stay in a motel for the first night, since getting a bike tour underway is, to put it bluntly, difficult enough as is. The rain started as I approached the town, so I didn't take too much footage past this point, but I did spot something as I entered Nyack proper. LGBT and trans pride flags were painted on the sidewalk, and numerous stores had signs saying "Disarm Hate" and more. I know from experience there's a lot of nastiness in the world, but seeing things like this in a relatively small town does remind me that there's a lot of good too. Exhausted but happy, I eventually found my motel and passed out not long after.
Alright, I don't think there's going to be any further updates today, but if there is, I'll let you know. Alright, this is the Restless Yankee on day 1, signing out.
As I would discover, days 2 and 3 would more or less go the same way. Rain and disappointingly short distances. Given that I was in Nyack, I wanted to cross over the Hudson via the recently replaced Tappen Zee bridge, which just so happens to have a dedicated bike and pedestrian path. And no, I didn't care much that it was raining. I'll let past me explain.
I feel alive. I'm getting blown side to side by the wind. I am pretty much drenched, although the rain gear is helping a lot. And it's the best feeling in the world. I really can't describe it beyond that.
I eventually reached the town of Tarraytown on the East Bank, and it wasn't long until I found myself staring into 400 years of history. I would have liked to stay longer, but the rain was making this a miserable experience to say the least. After only a few hours, I finally threw in the towel and found a somewhat overpriced campground at Croton Point Park, having only covered 15 miles.
Okay, so I've got the tent up. Wasn't the best day of riding. It was actually, I think I only did like 15 miles in total, which isn't that great, but there are always going to be days like that, so I just can't let it get to me. I guess what it really boils down to is I just have to keep moving forward, so. Okay, it's the morning of day 3. I'm just starting to break down everything.
Day 3 still had some drizzling rain, but I finally felt like I was starting to make progress. I also inflated the tires up to a higher PSI to help make things a bit easier, but it was becoming clear that the last 2 days had physically wiped me out. However, the views were getting better, and by noon I had rolled into the town of Peekskill.
Okay, we made it to Peekskill, which is a seriously scenic little town here on the Hudson Valley, as you can see behind me. So I'm gonna restock here and then clock. The time at the tone will be 12 o'clock.
Everything seemed to be going my way until I tried to continue onward.
Well, this is a problem. I can't get over the bridge.
After a lot of staring at the map, I backtracked to Peekskill and ended up taking the train one stop to Garrison. Ahead of me was the town of Cold Spring. I used the opportunity to recharge my batteries and then went to find a place to set down for the night. After some effort, I found a rather amazing spot on the edge of the Hudson River. I got the tent up, set my clothes out to dry, and then passed out for the night. Day 4 mostly started the way Day 2 and Day 3 had, but with a newfound sense of resolve. I also had an amazing breakfast in Cold Spring, which no doubt helped. My body was, at this point, in need of a rest day, but the city of Poughkeepsie was only 20 or so miles north. Poughkeepsie has a lot of symbolic value for this trip. For one, it's where I actually ended my first long-distance tour in 2015. That trip had started in Rochester, New York, and had gone a little under 300 miles when a broken pannier convinced me to call it. 7 years later, and I've effectively closed that last leg. Still, that was then and this is now, and I would soon start seeing those pieces of history I had talked about. What I didn't expect was to find it hidden on the side of the road. I'll let past me cover it in more detail.
So I just bought this sign and a marker next to it talking about the Revolutionary War and how this was a site of defensive battery. And I was thinking about this. I'm on a very deserted road. There's nothing around me, just cars going by. You would not know this was here unless you stopped. And then I took a closer look, and the sign says 1935, and the marker stone says 1902. So these have probably been here for over a century. On the hills back of the stone stood free batteries guarding this pass, 1776 to 1783. On this hill during the American Revolution was a battery for the defense of the Gorge of the Mountains, Fishkill Cove. State Education Department, 1935.
I've been thinking a lot on how the world changes from era to era, although it's still going to be some time before I'm ready to voice my conclusions. But just to show how much things can change, a few miles later, I encountered what appeared to be a mostly abandoned shopping plaza in the town of Fishkill. From what little signage I could spot, it seems to have been sitting here for at least 20 to 30 years, just rotting away.
I'm walking by, I'm seeing a lot of water damage and more structural members. There's a couple of signs that suggest that this was abandoned in the 80s or 90s. I mean, my big hint to how long this has been sitting here is actually that Discover logo in the window. I'm hoping you can see it on camera, because that looks like the type they were using in the early 90s. So this has been here for a long time, and all the road signs, the red has faded away from the UV light. So this is just, wow. How do you like that swimming pool? It's actually not that deep, although there's obviously no drainage. So here you can see the area we just walked by. You can see, if I pan over, it continues for quite a while. No name, but you can see the full extent of the decay, the weeds, where the signs were.
Makes you wonder what stories these walls could say if they could talk. The rest of the day went smoothly, and I ended up checking into a Holiday Inn for 2 nights, both to recover and to start editing this video. If you wish to support my travels, consider supporting the channel with the links in the description. Until next time, this is the Restless Yankee signing off and hoping to see you all on the road of life.